Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's Crime and Punishment story. This week I'm covering the sad story of Michael Cavanagh and the murder of Mary Cavanagh, which took place in Walker in 1891. I hope you will find it interesting. But before we begin, can I just say, if you do enjoy this video, then please give it a thumbs up. And if you are new here or haven't already done so, then do please consider subscribing to the channel to help support the content we create. Thank you. And I would just like to add that I always do now, that I do record these stories live, so I do sometimes make mistakes, which I always try to rectify. So I hope this does not spoil your enjoyment of the video. And on the same subject, I did notice when I was checking my notes earlier that in some places I had put that the couple lived in Byker. Now this was because they lived in Byker Street in Walker. So I have edited the notes and hopefully I will say Walker and not Byker, but I just thought I'd mention that in case Byker slips in anywhere and I don't notice it while I'm recording. Michael Cavanagh was born in Ireland in around 1855 and was around 36 years old in 1891. His parents are unknown. He lived in Walker with his wife and only remaining child, Margaret. Michael worked as a labourer at the shipyard. Also living with Michael and his wife was his brother James and his brother-in-law Patrick, and a lodger by the name of Michael Costello. No mention was made of Michael being addicted to drink, but he was known to be a heavy drinker on occasions. Mary Cavanagh, the victim, was also born in Ireland in around 1857 and was said to be around 34 years old at the time of her death. Her parents are also unknown. She lived with her husband Michael in Walker, and the couple had had 6 children together, but sadly only one child was still living in 1891. Mary was often known to drink too much. However, no one stated that she was actually addicted to drink. In some areas of this story, people share the same Christian name. In these cases, I will sometimes have to refer to them by their surnames to try and avoid any confusion. On the afternoon of August the 22nd, 1891, Michael, Mary and their lodger, Michael Costello, all went out for a drink to the Corporation Hotel in Walker. They had a few pints of beer and then Mary left to go for some shopping. Michael Cavanagh and Michael Costello returned to their home at around 7:30 p.m. and Mary came in a few minutes later, and Cavanagh asked where she had been until so late, and she said she had been shopping. For what seemed like no reason, Cavanagh then struck his wife about the head. Costello stepped in between them and calmed him down before heading off to a neighbour's room, leaving the couple alone. While Costello was away, he heard sounds of a disturbance coming from the room of the Cavanaghs, and when he returned, he found Mary lying on the floor and Michael sitting by the fire. Costello asked what had happened, and Cavanagh replied that she had fallen. Costello did not believe him and thought Mary looked as if she had been beaten. Patrick Welsh, who was Mary's brother, also came back to the house around the same time, and when he saw Mary on the floor, he went back out to look for a policeman, and Cavanagh went to fetch a doctor. When Dr. Rose arrived, he found Mary in bed unconscious. She had many bruises on her head, and he asked Michael what had happened, and he said he did not know. He gave her some medication and then he left. At 2 a.m. that following morning, he was informed that Mary had died. Sergeant Jewett went to the house and found Mary in bed. By this time, she was already dead. Her head was badly bruised, and acting on information he received from Costello, he then arrested Cavanagh for the willful murder of his wife. But Cavanagh said he knew nothing about it. The inquest was held at the Scrog Inn at Walker before Coroner Lynn. Patrick Welsh said he had identified the body as being that of his sister Mary, who was the wife of Michael Cavanagh. He said he himself had lodged with the couple for between 11 and 12 years. He said the couple often argued, and these arguments frequently came to blows, and he had seen Michael strike Mary many times in the past. He even added that he had seen Michael kick his sister in the past, and he felt that he did ill-use her. Patrick said he had last seen the couple at around 3 p.m. on the afternoon of the 22nd. They appeared to be on friendly terms at that time. He had left the house shortly after this and did not return until around 9 p.m. He said on his return he found Mary in bed unable to speak. She had bruises all over her face. He said he felt suspicious about how his sister had been injured and went out to look for a policeman. I have to say here it seems very odd to me that Patrick had lived with the family for so many years, had allegedly seen signs of violence towards his sister, and felt that her husband ill-used her, and yet seemed to do nothing to stop it. I do find that very sad. Michael Costello said he lived with the Cavanaghs in Walker for around 9 months. He said on the afternoon of the 22nd he had gone with them to the Corporation Hotel at around 4:30 p.m. He said Mary had stayed there until around 5:30 when she left to go for the groceries for the family. He said he stayed in the public house with Michael Cavanagh until around 7 p.m. when they left to go home. He thought they had both had around 7 or 8 pints each, but they were both only a little drunk. When they arrived home, Mary had not yet returned from grocery shopping, but she came in around 10 minutes later. He said she was also under the influence of drink, but he did not think that she was drunk. He said Cavanagh was not happy that she was so late home and had asked her where she had been. She replied saying, "I have been getting things in for the week from the store and could not get away from there in a hurry." Costello said as soon as she said this, Cavanagh struck out at her, hitting her around the head. He stood between them and was able to calm him down. He said after this, Mary began to clean the house, and he sat for a while talking to Cavanagh before leaving to visit an unnamed neighbour. He said when he left there had been no one else in the house with the couple but their young daughter, who was only a baby. Costello continued by saying that when he was in the neighbour's house he heard some noises coming from the Cavanagh's house. He immediately went back and found Mary lying on the floor. He asked what had happened, and he said Cavanagh told him that Mary had fallen. He said Cavanagh then went to fetch a doctor. He himself went to fetch some brandy for Mary. When he returned a little later, the doctor was already there, and when asked, he said he had never seen Cavanagh strike his wife before. Mrs. Ellen Purcell said she lived in the rooms below the Cavanaghs. She said on the night of August the 22nd, she had seen both Costello and Cavanagh return home. She felt they were both very much under the influence of drink. She also saw Mary return home a short while later and felt that she too was very much drunk. She said around 8:30 p.m. Costello came to her saying that he was worried about Mary. She said she went with him to the rooms above and found Mary on the floor and Michael holding her head in his arms. She asked him what was wrong and he replied, "Nothing." Ellen said Mary was then put into bed and she bathed her face and hands with cold water. She said it was then that Michael went to fetch a doctor. She stayed with Mary until she died at around 12:30 on the 23rd. She did not know who had later gone to inform the doctor of her death. Margaret Maguire said she lived in the same building in Walker as the Cavanaghs. She said just before 8:30 p.m. Costello came to her rooms with the child, Margaret, in his arms. He said he was very worried about Mary. She said she had also gone to the Cavanaghs' home and seen Mary lying on the floor. She also asked Michael what had happened and he replied saying, "I don't know, I have done nothing." When asked, she said she had not heard any sounds of a disturbance in the building that night. Dr. Rose said on the night of the 22nd, Michael had come to his surgery and asked him to go and see his wife. He said he had asked what was wrong with her and Michael had said he did not know. He said he felt that Michael was under the influence of drink. When he arrived at their home, he found Mary in bed, unable to speak. She had many bruises on her face, and he felt she was suffering from concussion. He again asked Michael what had happened, but he again said he did not know. He said he had treated her with some medication, and she seemed a little better when he left. However, at around 2 a.m., he had been informed that Mary had died not long after he had left her. Dr. Hurst said he had performed the postmortem on the body of Mary Cavanagh, assisted by Dr. Rose and Dr. Aitchison. He said she had several bruises on her face and head. He did not find any fracture to the skull, but the brain was very much congested with many clots of blood. It was his professional opinion that the clots to the brain had been the cause of her death. Dr. Rose and Dr. Aitchison gave evidence in agreement with Dr. Hurst as to the cause of death. Sergeant Jewett said he had been called to the house in the early hours of the 23rd. He found the body of Mary Cavanagh in bed. She had signs of violence about her body, and he had been told by Michael Costello that Michael Cavanagh had struck her the previous night. Acting on this information, he had arrested Cavanagh on a charge of causing the death of his wife. He had replied to this by saying, "I know nothing about it. I only remember having her in my arms when one of the neighbours came in." There were no details of what the coroner said to the jury, but after retiring for only a short while, they returned a verdict of guilty of manslaughter against Michael Cavanagh, and he was committed for trial. I did not find any evidence of a funeral for Mary Cavanagh. Although she did have a brother in the area, obviously as he lived with her, it is possible that he was not able to pay for a funeral, and again, as is often sadly the case, this may have been another pauper's funeral. I did not find any evidence of a headstone for Mary anywhere in the area. Prior to the trial, a hearing was held at the Moot Hall in November of 1891 regarding the baby daughter, Margaret Cavanagh. An application had been made by the police for the admission of Margaret to what was called at the time a home for friendless girls. This request was granted, and Margaret would later be taken to the Ashburton home in Gosforth. I would just like to mention before covering the trial that it would seem that while everyone was out either drinking or shopping on the day of August the 22nd, no mention was ever made of the baby, and it does seem that she may have been left at home alone. The trial took place at the Moot Hall in Newcastle in November of 1891, and the judge in this case is not mentioned. Michael pleaded not guilty to the charge. As is often the case, the evidence given at the trial is very much the same as that given at the inquest, so I will only include any new information. Patrick Welsh gave almost the same evidence as at the trial, only adding that Mary was often drunk, and then in a rather loud outburst he said there was no one in the courtroom that could say anything about her, not even the prisoner. This prompted the judge to say, "Try to keep quiet, or we shall already think that you have had a drop too much, and some of us already think so." Patrick did continue, but only to say that sometime shortly before the 22nd, Mary had complained of feeling dizzy and had fallen. He thought she may have had a drink at that time as well. Michael Costello gave almost the same evidence as at the inquest, only adding that when Cavanagh had struck his wife, she had turned to him and said, "Don't do that again," and simply continued with her work in the room, and Cavanagh did not strike her again. This was slightly different to when he had previously stated that he had tried to calm Cavanagh down and had stopped him from striking his wife again. And he also added that around 6 weeks before her death he had seen Mary with a bruise on her face and a black eye, and she had complained to him that her husband had ill-used her. Margaret Maguire added to her statement by saying that she had never seen the couple argue and that she felt Michael was a quiet, steady man. She said she felt he had always been kind to his wife. Ellen Purcell also added similar information to her statement, saying she too had never heard the couple argue. In fact, she felt they were a very quiet, peaceful couple. Dr. Hurst was recalled and questioned as to whether or not the injuries to Mary's head and face could have been caused by her falling. He stated that any of the bruises on her body could easily have been caused by her falling several times onto a hard surface. There was nothing else to point to a cause of death other than the internal damage in the area where these bruises had been. But he did also add that a punch to the face could have also caused these bruises. Sadly, at this point, there is no evidence of anything stated by the prosecution or by the defence. Now, whilst we can imagine that the prosecution will have held the view that Michael had clearly attacked his wife, as evidence had been heard of a disturbance on the night in question, and had also been given of his previous abuse of his wife, we can also imagine that the defence would have made much of the doctor's statement that any or all of the bruises and internal injuries could have been caused by a drunken woman falling several times. The jury retired for only a short time before returning a verdict of not guilty, and Michael Cavanagh was discharged and allowed to return home. Michael remained in the Walker area and can be found still living at Baker Street in both 1901 and 1911. He is still living with his brother and does not appear to have remarried. However, I did notice that his age is wrong in both 1901 and 1911, with him seeming to be only 50 years old in 1911 when he should really have been 56. And this one is not a lot of difference. However, on the 1901 census, he had only aged 2 years from 1891. Now, I'm not sure if this was done in a way to be able to allow him to continue working when he was perhaps getting too old. I don't really know, but it did seem a little bit strange that both him and his brother had strange ages in the census forms. Margaret, the couple's daughter, does appear on the 1911 census living with her father and uncle. However, in 1901, she was still living in the children's home in Gosforth. It is unclear why she did not return home sooner, but the children's home was closed in around 1906 and demolished by 1907, and a lot of the remaining girls were then transferred to Darlington, so this may have been when she moved back to live with her father. It must have been a really hard life for Margaret, as the children's home was very strict and the girls were actually trained to march by an army drill instructor, among other things. And it is quite sad that she was only placed there because of her mother's death and her father's arrest, but was then left there when she could have returned to live with her father sooner after his release. I did not find any further details about the family after 1911. This case was very confusing. A lot of the evidence was given by Patrick Welsh that Michael had ill-used his wife, and Michael Costello did say that he had seen Cavanagh strike Mary on the day of her death, but others had said they had never seen the couple argue at all. And it certainly seems that the jury did not believe there was much substance in the idea of Michael abusing his wife, and were quick to find him not guilty, most likely based on the doctor's evidence that her injuries could have actually been caused by falls because she was drunk on the night in question. So did Michael abuse his wife, or did she blame him for previous injuries as a way to cover up falls she had had when drinking? Well, sadly, only the two people involved can really tell us what the truth is, and neither of them are able to do so today. I have to admit that I cannot decide who was responsible for Mary's death. I half believe that Michael did hit her on the day, but I also do believe that she was drunk and she may have fallen and caused some of the injuries herself. And I think the jury would have struggled to come to any other verdict than not guilty based on the evidence given at the trial and the inquest. But what do you think? Do you think there was any truth in the information given by Patrick and Costello that Michael had ill-used his wife? Or do you think in her drunken state on more than one occasion she had fallen and caused her own injuries? Do you think the jury were correct to find Michael not guilty, or should he have been found guilty of manslaughter? Do let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I do hope that you have found this sad and tragic story interesting, and I do thank you all very much for watching, and I do hope to see you all again very soon.